we don't hear about police officers being heroes until, unfortunately, they lose their lives in the line of duty. They're heroes every day because there's not very many people that, you know, will put on that gun and badge and say, I'll go out here and I'll sacrifice my life and safety to make sure that my city is safe.
Joining us this morning is Mike Morse, Detroit's top attorney. Mike Morse is in here to tell us about the backpack giveaway.
Adapt and change things up a little bit every year. Hi, I'm Mike Morse. Welcome to another episode of Open Mic. I'm here with Kevin Dietz, as usual, with Chief Robert Dunlap. Good morning, Chief.
Good morning.
You're the chief of the jails and courts for the Sheriff's Department of Wayne County. Is that true?
That's right, under the awesome Sheriff Benny and Napoleon.
He's an amazing man, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
He's a good friend, and we're so happy to have you here.
Thank you.
So, one of the busiest jobs in the world. There's almost no county that has more activity than...
We are the largest in the state of Michigan, and we have more inmates than any other jail in the state of Michigan. Our average population today is hovering right around 2,200 total, and that's a significant reduction from just a couple of years ago. And that is because we also have probably one of the largest electronic monitoring systems in the state, where we have right at 600 inmates that are on electronic monitoring, in addition to the 1,600 that we have in the jail on a daily basis.
Interesting. So you add those two numbers together.
We add those two numbers together. Our in-custody population recently, over probably the last year, we've been hovering right around 1,650 average daily population, and that's significantly down from about a year and a half ago. We was at 1,800, and just 3 years ago, 1,900. 4 years ago, we're at 2,200. So we're doing some things to reduce the jail population.
And is that the tethering?
Well, it's a combination of things. One, working with the entire criminal justice system in Wayne County to make sure that we identify those individuals that really need to be in jail opposed to those that should be in treatment. One of the things that we know around this country is the conversation about mental illness and the over-incarceration of people who are mentally ill. And in Wayne County, I think we're very progressive in terms of working with our partners to identify those individuals that are coming into our jail who suffer from mental illnesses and making sure that they're properly assessed and moved from jail to treatment, opposed to being incarcerated and further declining in their mental health.
How many different jails do you operate?
So we operate 3 different jails, 2 downtown and 1 in Hamtramck.
And you're also transporting prisoners to and from court?
Yeah, we transport an average of about 150 people a day to and from court.
That's a lot.
It is.
So how many employees do you have working directly under you?
So roughly right now we're somewhere around 800 total in the jails and court system.
Wow.
But unfortunately, we're also short about 160 people because it's hard to recruit folks. Because I often say this, you know, I'm retired from the Detroit Police Department, where I did almost 23 years. I retired as the assistant chief. And, you know, I thought I had an understanding of what the jail system really was like. And obviously, I had a rude awakening when I started there about 9-10 years ago. I say now that being a jailer is probably one of the toughest jobs in America, and we have some great men and women in the Wayne County Sheriff system that do a great job every day of securing our facilities, both in the jails and the courts. And I say that because, you know, one of the differences is being a police officer on the street, you deal with individuals, usually 1 or 2 encounters at a time. In the jail, these officers are dealing with inmates 64 to 1. There's 1 officer in a housing unit dealing with 64 people that law enforcement has detained. And just because they're behind bars don't mean that they're any less dangerous than they were on the street.
So we're jumping around a little bit. I mean, I wanted to get into your background a little bit more, and so I'm glad you just brought that up. So you worked for the Detroit Police Department for 23 years?
I did.
And you worked up through the ranks to become
the assistant chief.
And what tell me why did you retire from there, and tell me about your experience there for 23 years.
Well, obviously, you know, in Detroit, once you go past the rank of lieutenant, you're what is called an appointee, and pretty much an at-will employee. And so I started my career in 1986, and between 86 and 2008, we probably saw a change in the leadership in that department as far as chief about 5 or 6 different times. And in 2008, as you know, there was a lot going on in the city of Detroit. We had an embattled mayor, and I think we had 3 turnovers at the chief's rank. And I was given an opportunity, I think, under Chief Barron to stay behind as a commander. And I made a decision that it was better for me to retire and move on with my career at the rank of assistant chief. Chief Barron came in at the time when we had the interim mayor in Ken Cockrell, who was the council president. And if you remember, he stepped in, I think that was like about a 4 or 5 month period to replace
not very
the mayor.
long.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, in that 4 or 5 months, I think his idea was that he could reform the whole city and all departments. And
in 5 months.
Obviously, it didn't work out for him.
So,
Well, he was hoping to stick around. I think he wanted to be mayor, but didn't make it.
well, this is really interesting because, you know, later, you know, our next an interview that we have coming up is with Assistant Chief Steve Dunlap.
Don't, yes.
And he, you know, one of the things I was going to ask him, and I'm going to ask you, is, you know, the whole hierarchy system within the police department is a little confusing to me, and I haven't been able to ask that yet. And there's a lot of chiefs, there's a lot of assistant chiefs, there's commanders, and for my education, take me through the ranking system real quick. So, because there's like 10 commanders in the DPD or 12 commanders.
I don't know exactly what it is now. When I retired, we had approximately 3,800 employees sworn and about another 700 civilians. So we're right at 4,200 people. I understand today, talking to some of the officers, they're about half of that. And so when I was there, the rank structure was you start out as a police officer, you test and promote to the rank of sergeant, you test and promote to the rank of lieutenant, which I'm humbly honored and grateful to tell you that out of about 2,500 people in 1999, Robert Dunlap was the one that wrote the absolute top score for the rank of lieutenant.
Congratulations.
And
Nice one. Nice one.
Yeah, that's something that I'm very proud of.
That's awesome.
So after lieutenant, there's an appointment to the rank of inspector, which I believe now DPD call them captains. And after inspector, there's an appointment to the rank of commander, deputy chief, assistant chief, and chief. During my tenure, we had 2 assistant chiefs. I believe now they have 3.
3 assistant chiefs, and how many deputy chiefs?
During my tenure, we had about 5.
Okay, so
Just to give it a little perspective, I mean, Detroit is huge. It's
Right,
a
yes.
massive amount of land.
Yes.
And so they have precincts all over the place. So you have to have people in charge of all these places. So you have the east side, west side. You got,
Correct.
what is it 12 precincts or whatever
Correct,
it is now?
12 precincts.
And so you do have a lot of bosses, and it may sound like a lot. Like I think of that when I talk about schools. It's like, how many assistant superintendents do we have?
Right.
But really, in the city of Detroit, you really have so much land. You need someone in charge in all these places who can then report to then the Eastern District or the Western District, who then report to headquarters, and then they go up the chain from there.
That's absolutely correct. I think one of the ways to think of it is like the military. You know, in the United States, our military is spread across our country and abroad. And obviously, there's probably a battalion in almost every state. And so you probably have a commander and a deputy chief in every state that's reporting up to the colonel. And so when you look at Detroit, you know, as Devin indicated, you can't look at Detroit like, say, an Inkster or River Rouge. You know, those cities you can probably put inside of Detroit maybe 2 or 3 times, as well as Hamtramck, Highland Park. And so based on just the geography, you know, Detroit is divided in its police department to make sure that we can handle the workload across the city.
You know, I do know how large it is because Sheriff Napoleon gave me a drive around last year, and he took me, I think we did the east side. He said, you want to do the east side today or west side? And we did the east side, and that was eye-opening. It was really massive. You're right. It is bigger than anybody thinks.
The city of Boston, Manhattan, and San Francisco, I believe, will all fit in the city of Detroit.
With a population of around
about 600,000 here.
600,000. So it's hard to patrol. It's hard to take care of all of that land in an efficient way, isn't it?
Well, I won't use the word hard, but you have to be strategic about how you do it.
Challenging.
Yes.
Challenging is a good word. But that's not really what I want to get into, because I do want to focus on jails. I do want to focus on all of that. But, you 23 years, you decided it was time to go. And how did you hook up with our sheriff?
So Sheriff Napoleon has actually been my mentor in the Detroit Police Department. I met him probably after my first year on the job, and I was working actually with one of his relatives, one of his cousins who graduated from the police academy with me, took me over, introduced me to the sheriff, who I believe was a lieutenant at that time in the Detroit Police Department. And, the sheriff said some things to me about, coming to work every day, staying out of trouble, doing your job, and going to school and moving ahead. And, he gave me some advice about school and work. And, he offered to kind of coach me along the way. And so throughout my career, he would check in on me and see how I was doing. And we developed a relationship. A lot of folks often ask, why does Sheriff Napoleon take care of this guy so much? And I believe if he was here today, he'll say that I'm one of the few people in the department that, he sat down as a young officer and gave some advice. And I believe I followed his advice and did all of the things that he suggested I should do. And it paid off in a big way. I made it to the rank of commander when Sheriff Napoleon was in the Detroit Police Department. When he left, there was a rumor, Dunlap, he sold out Sheriff Napoleon, Chief Napoleon. He's no longer here. This administration is going to get rid of him. And I was blessed and fortunate to make the rank of deputy chief and assistant chief even after that. And then when I decided to move on, my mentor said, Rob, there's a place for you here in the Wayne County Sheriff's Office, because he knew what he had invested in me over 25, 30 years.
It's interesting. When I talk to, people who worked in the Detroit Police Department, they say similar things about Benny. We had Ira Todd on, who said some similar things about Benny when he was the chief for only, I think it was a year and a half, 2
Yes.
years that he was there. Mm-hmm. He said he was the best chief he worked for out of his 35 years on the job. Do you feel similar? Was he that good of a chief?
I'm obviously biased. I
Yeah,
work for him
I
now.
understand.
I think he's the best sheriff. But let me say this. Let me tell you why I say this, because it's more than just the officers in the department. He's somebody that really cares about the city and Wayne County. I can tell you a story about how, today, a lot of people in Wayne County know Sheriff Benny Napoleon as Benny. And imagine this, there's 2,200 inmates in our system, and someone's mother call and say, hey, Benny, my son, he needs these compression stockings, and, that medical team there, they haven't had a chance to get them to him yet. And Sheriff Napoleon is one of those guys to pick up the phone and call me, the chief, Robert, why doesn't that guy have his stockings? I mean, this literally happened last year at Christmas time. While everybody was gone on vacation, I'm on the phone with the sheriff talking about an inmate that don't have compression stockings. And so I got up from my desk and went to the CVS and bought compression stockings to make sure that individual had those stockings. And Sheriff Napoleon does that for everybody, not just the officers. So I think, his legacy is obviously, his compassion for the people and the folks that he has developed, nurtured, and raised into some of the law enforcement leaders that we are.
I met Benny during the Nancy Kerrigan, Tanya Harding incident. That's when we became close anyway. And I jokingly asked him one day, because we were spending hours and hours, days and days, and months during that whole debacle. But I asked him, so, now that you're a boss, are you worried about like the media following you around or something like that? He goes, I don't worry about that one bit. He goes, I have a young daughter and I don't go anywhere that my young daughter can't go. Yeah. And I think his success is that he looks through law enforcement through the eyes of his daughter. What should this city look like, or this department look like for my daughter or my mother or my brother or my sister? He really looks at it through the eyes of his family, which makes it different than looking at it, say, what are we going to do about these criminals? It's just a different feel.
Right. He is completely different than most people I've met in your line of work. He really does care. He doesn't put himself out there like others to, he won't put himself in a bad situation. He doesn't. I've never seen him with any alcohol. It's always a pop or a soda or whatever.
Absolutely.
And
maybe an ice cream sundae or two.
Yeah, he likes to
Well,
eat.
Devin said it best, and that shows you how well Devin knows him. Because if
Kevin or Devin?
Oh, I'm sorry, Kevin.
No,
I know
Kevin.
you're getting confused on that because
Kevin,
he looks
please.
like
Kevin Dietz said it best. And
I know.
If you sat with Benny today, that's exactly what he would tell you. And he says that to us all the time. He says, Robert, you have one daughter like I have one daughter. He says, when you make decisions, you have to make the decision, ask yourself, what if Amanda was here? And what would I hope Amanda see? Okay. And so certainly Kevin knows him well. And most people around this county, this state, and this country that knows Benny Napoleon know that what Kevin said is spot on.
It's awesome. Well, lots of love for Benny. Hopefully we'll have him on the podcast soon. And we'll get to praise him when he's here in front of us. But let's so you've been in charge of the jails in Wayne County for how long now?
4 years now.
And there's a lot of stuff in the news about the Epstein case. Have you been following that?
So I don't follow that news much, but obviously it's so much out there you can't avoid it.
I'm with you. I read some articles this morning, and I've been watching it. I think it's kind of interesting because there's podcasters out there like the Joe Rogans of the world who I'm a fan of, who thinks that he was murdered in that federal prison in New York City. The autopsy and other people who work for the prison system and think that he hung himself and he committed suicide.
Correct.
So there is that debate that we're going to get into. And at the end, I'm going to ask you your opinion, and we're going to talk about that. But let's break it down a little bit about when you have somebody in your custody, and about the security, and about suicide watch, and about cameras, and about staffing. I want to get into all of that with you.
And one other interesting thing with Epstein and people that you guys have in custody is that a lot of this is the motive behind the idea of killing Epstein that makes it so that
salacious,
that this guy supposedly has a bunch of videotapes of other people that maybe were doing things wrong, and so maybe people want him dead. And like in Wayne County, there's plenty of, probably every day, there's people who may want inmates dead so that they don't testify against them or for other reasons.
And that's correct. And I think probably the difference here is, all the high-profile politicians that, are identified as being associates at one point of Epstein.
It's a good point. I mean, Kevin brought up a good point. You've had probably celebrities in your jails.
We have
high-profile people. Name a couple that you can think of.
So there's been quite a few. Certainly, unfortunately, our previous mayor, Matty Maroon, person that owns the bridge, and there's been quite a few others.
So is there special treatment given when you have Kwame Kilpatrick or Matty Maroon in your jail?
It's only special attention in the sense of these are individuals that you would never expect to be placed in a situation like this. And like any other inmate, that first 48 to 72 hours is the most critical time. The research shows that generally, jail suicides and things like that occur within that first 48 to 72 hours. And so, we would flag them and put them on a special watch. And in our jail, we would obviously put them in a location where they can be closely watched. And whereas our rounds are every 45 minutes on the hour, we would increase the watch to maybe every 30 minutes on the hour. And in some cases, depending on the behavior and activity of the individual, we would have them under constant watch, every 15 minutes or continuous watch where it's uninterrupted. Someone like Epstein, I certainly believe that, throughout his stay, he should have been on a suicide watch throughout the stay. I understand at some point he was removed from suicide watch, and he had not gone to trial yet, which to me didn't make a whole lot of sense. We have the individual that's just recently shot the Detroit police officer. I would expect that he's probably going to get to our jail today. I saw the press conference yesterday. That individual is going to be put under suicide watch because we want to make sure that he has no opportunity to harm himself while he's in our jail.
And do you have cameras on your jails, or cameras in the hallways, or cameras that actually show the inmate? I'm sure it's different everywhere.
Well, as you know, we're building a new jail in Wayne County, and right now we don't have as many cameras as we'd like to have. And so there are some areas we have cameras, and unfortunately there are some areas we don't.
They say in this Epstein case, the two cameras that were facing the jail where he was, or where he was, the cell where he was, malfunctioned that day, which makes people go crazy. Well, but do cameras malfunction on a regular basis, or the cameras you have, or
cameras are like any other technology. There is a possibility that the cameras can malfunction. So, of course, that's something that the people there in New York will have to explain.
But wait, hold on. How rare is that? let's because we have cameras all over these offices, and I have a crack IT staff here, and they tell me that they don't go down. So in this day and age, how often are you looking for a tape and you find, oh crap, it went down and it didn't record what I wanted to record? How often does that happen?
Well, let me say this, Mike. Unfortunately, sometime in government, we don't have the quality and type of equipment that you have here in this office.
I understand.
And because of the quality and type of equipment that government can afford, there is sometimes challenges. And
the cameras are older than you are.
Well, is that, I mean, you got old equipment.
Absolutely.
But
you ever heard of Palco?
No.
Yeah, see?
That's old.
Some
that's
of those
old
cameras
stuff. But how often? I mean, how is it weekly, monthly, yearly that you go to look for a tape and it's gone, or it's corroded, or it's malfunctioned? I just need a sense, because
so it's different by agency. We require that our supervisors do a random review weekly, but when they're doing a random review, they're not looking at the entire system. They might be looking randomly at 2 or 3 housing units on a given day, and unless you have someone that is constantly sitting there watching every camera, it's hard to say that, that was something that could have been avoided. There is a possibility that, the cameras may have malfunctioned on that day. Now, you would think, given the gravity of the situation with Epstein, that those things would have been checked off prior to putting them in that location. And so,
wait. So, yeah, that's an interesting point that I was thinking of. Like, this is probably as high of a profile person as that jail system. Now, they've had some big names in there. Okay, I've read the names. There's some big names. But this guy allegedly tried committing suicide 6 days before he actually committed suicide or was murdered.
According to the reports.
You'd think they would make sure that the best cameras they had in the jail were either moved, checked, buy some new ones. Cameras these days are not that expensive. I mean, you could put a cheap cell phone in there, constantly videotaping the guy or something, a camcorder. I don't know what. You would have figured it out. I mean, some of the story is a little bit crazy that it malfunctioned.
And the 2 guards who were supposed to check every 30 minutes.
We're not there yet, Kevin. We're not there yet. But
I was going to go there.
No, yeah. I mean, so okay. So so you're saying sometimes it does malfunction. So okay. So talk to me about Suicide Watch. Let's break that down. So you said in the first 48 to 72 hours, do you know how many suicides you have a year in your custody?
Well, fortunately, thank God, the last 2 years we have not had any. But there was a time where we had our challenges. I think In 2015, we had more than our share in 2015.
How many?
About 4 or 5
And
in
out of
that
those
year alone.
And out of those 4 or 5, how many occurred in the first 72 hours?
You know what? Unfortunately, I cannot give you that information. Probably only about 1 or 2.
Okay.
In this first.
But you mentioned that that's a critical time to
Correct.
assess people and watch people.
Correct.
And then there's always a risk of suicide.
Yes.
And so is suicide, I mean, they do it through the sheets? Is that how they do it?
Sheets. There's various ways they do it. Sheets, towels. And it's mostly through the sheets. And so we've recently, in our jail, in our mental health ward, we've taken all the sheets and we've given them blankets because it's harder to tie a blanket into a knot, a ligature, than a sheet. But, you know, in a couple of our cases, we had inmates that jumped from the balcony and killed themselves.
Oh, in the second floor of the interior of the jail?
Yes. And
down to the concrete floors.
Correct.
Interesting. Okay, there's not a hope. I mean, I guess there's things you could do to stop that, but if someone wants to take their own life, they're going to find a way.
And that's generally it. And suicide, you know, is the #1 cause of death in jails. You have to remember these people have a lot of idle time. And we're not watching every individual every minute of the day. And so it only takes about, 6-7 minutes to commit suicide. So if we have a watch where our rounds are every 30 minutes, that's at least 2 or 3 opportunities that an individual, after the officer goes by, could actually take themselves out. And so in the, again, in the case with Epstein, I do think there were some warnings. You know, as you indicated, the previous attempt to take his life, those things are going to have to be explained. How come after this first attempt, you didn't confirm that the location that you put him in, everything was working, and you increased the rounds on that housing unit?
And he was in a special housing unit. It's my understanding. He was moved. Do you have a special housing unit in Wayne County?
We do. We have a couple of special housing
So what does
units.
that mean? What does that consist of? Who would go in those units?
So in Wayne County, if a person doesn't report any signs of potential suicide hazard, we put them in a general housing space based on their classification level. But if any person comes in and there's certain things that they can say, which I won't say on this podcast, they'll get flagged, and right away we'll move them to the mental health floor. And so in Wayne County, we have the largest inpatient mental health facility in the state. And why do I say that? We have 120 beds dedicated to folks with mental health issues. And anyone that is reporting signs of potential suicide, they would be flagged by the mental health staff for evaluation.
And there's more eyes on the people in the special housing unit?
Yes, there's more eyes because in addition to the floor security staff, you know, you have the nursing staff, you have the psychosocial workers, and there's just a whole lot more activity on those floors and those units than any other floor.
And is that the unit that Kilpatrick went to?
No, so Kilpatrick, after a while, he was put in our segregation unit. He was put in a space where the officers were right outside the door. And so, because again, some people don't have the issue of suicide, but just the fact that, you know, someone else might want to harm them. So you want to separate them from the rest of the population, like we do police officers that, you know, come in our custody. We don't mix them with the general population. We separate them for their own safety.
Now, you were the chief back when Kwame was in your custody?
I was the assistant. Well, no, not in the Wayne County jail.
Okay.
I was the assistant chief on the Detroit side when he was in Wayne County.
Got it. And do you know if they were worried that he was going to commit suicide?
I'm sure, you know, their concern was to watch him, you know, for that first 48 to 72 hours. And then once they got beyond that point, you know, just watching him for his own safety.
And the theory, what is the rules in your thought process when you have someone in your custody? I mean, these are people that are entrusted to your building.
Care and
to your
custody.
facility.
Correct.
You know, you got to take care of them. I assume you got to protect them
Yes.
from the other inmates, like you're telling me.
Yes.
Suicide, it's hard to, you know, you've mentioned, you know, some of the challenges. It takes 6-7 minutes. So you could constantly watch somebody. You could have cameras on them 24/7 that were working, and you could have one guard watching all the monitors.
Correct.
Do you have a system like that where a guard is watching 20, 30, 40, 64 is the number I think you put out there? I mean, is that do you have a camera system that does that, or is that too much?
We don't have a camera system where we have officers that's continuously focused on monitors. And I would find it hard to believe that any jail in America have a system like that because, you know, some of the things that I've learned from some of my travel to the Middle East, you know, in countries where they actually have cameras all over those countries, they actually rotate that staff every 15 to 20 minutes to give them breaks because those countries do have constant watch.
Interesting.
Mostly in the jails, we use cameras, you know, to help mitigate issues because oftentimes, you know, cameras only allow us an opportunity mostly to react to things that we see that could be a potential hazard. There is a small percentage of time where we're actually watching the camera and something actually happened and we can go in and intervene right away. Okay. It's mostly something has happened, and then we go back and we run the cameras back to see what did we miss.
Sure.
One thing like that happened was there's these guys that I call them bullies, you know, and there's 3 guys in the same cell, and the meals come, and the one guy eats all 3 meals. Right. The other 2 guys don't get any food. They're sitting there losing weight. They're complaining to the guard. The guy's like, hey, we put 3 in, 3 came out. You know, they go back to the video and they're like, this guy's eating all the meals. We got to do something about this guy. I mean, it could be that simple.
Maybe because he wanted the kosher meals.
It could be.
You offer kosher meals in Wayne County?
We do offer kosher meals.
Get out of town.
We do. It may not be the kosher that you want because it is jail.
What's that consist of? Like chicken noodle soup and kugel and things like that?
I understand, you know, there's some fresh vegetables. It's mostly a plant-based diet.
Really? Dr. Khan would be very happy to know that.
Yeah.
I will share that with him. So how do you decide if somebody is entitled to a kosher meal? Do they have to prove it to you?
So there's a form. You know, a lot of people, because of religious reasons, you know, request a kosher meal. And so we have chaplains in the jail that will sit down with them and fill out a form questionnaire, and then we submit it to the kitchen, and they'd be approved for a kosher meal. Now, oftentimes, you know, people will come in and say, hey, my religion requires a kosher meal. And then after they get that first meal, they switch religions right away.
Why is it so bad? It's a little dry? Is my mom cooking the meal? No, just kidding, Mom. I love you. You cook great
It's like
meals.
me when I, you know, first visited Dr. Khan, and he told me, well, hey, you know, Chief, I want you off all this stuff, and I want you to eat. I'm like, hey, Doc, a little bit at a time.
Are you kidding me right now? Do you know who Dr. Khan is?
I do know Dr. Khan, absolutely. I've been to his office.
Is he bullshitting me right now?
No, he's
or
telling you
is
the
this true?
truth. Yeah, no, he's telling you the truth. He was on our previous podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome guy.
That is so. Are you?
Awesome
Are
guy.
you? Do you eat mostly plant based or?
I'm not there yet. I said a little bit at a time. Like,
did you change your diet at all? After
so one of the
with him?
things that he got me to do was at least, you know, in the morning start out with a plant-based shake. You know, and so he says, all right, you know, you start in the morning and then you go to lunch. Haven't got to lunch yet.
Okay, so your breakfast smoothie. I had a plant-based smoothie this morning. A lot of spinach, some strawberries, banana, some protein powder, vegan protein powder.
Yes.
You do the same thing?
Yes.
Have you tried intermittent fasting yet?
No.
Okay, we talked a lot about intermittent fasting. We could talk off record on that stuff, but it's interesting. I love that you know Dr. Khan.
Yes,
that's so funny.
So can I ask another question about Epstein? Because I wanted to know what you thought about it. Because when they did the autopsy, you know, they ruled it a suicide, but then the family had their own person look at it and they said, no, these are consistent with
the bones,
with murders,
and the neck,
all of this stuff.
strangulation.
I mean, do you guys look into that, or do you have someone at the jail who does autopsies when someone unfortunately dies? Or
so obviously, you know, we in the jail, we're not qualified to do that. You know, if a suicide or death happens in our jail, that person is sent to the medical examiner, and the Wayne County medical examiner performs the autopsy.
You just defer to them. You don't have
Yes.
to make decisions like that.
Did you watch any of the controversy over the autopsy? Do you have any opinion on what they found? The family felt one way, the other felt the other way, just based on what they found, or is that just too medical to get into?
I think one is too medical to get into, and just from where I sit, I look at it like this. Obviously the family is upset; they want answers, and sometimes just the smallest possibility is something that could be a stretch. And so, yeah, there may have been a situation where, depending on how the incident occurred, suicide or not, but the strangulation could have caused maybe some fractures or contusion to some of the neck muscles and bones. Is that impossible? I don't think so. But is that an indication that, someone strangled him, or is it an indication that maybe he tied a sheet to something high and then flung himself down and, fractured a bone? It could go either way.
You've toured the Middle East looking at jails and looking at best protocols, it sounds like?
I did some terrorism training over in the Middle East.
And did you look in the? Were
I
you in
didn't
the
look
jails?
at jails.
You
I
weren't in
was
the
with
jails.
law enforcement and military at the time.
Have you toured other facilities?
Oh, I have.
Lots.
Probably maybe 6 or 7 different.
That's a lot.
facilities.
Any federal facilities have you ever toured?
No. I
Okay.
don't think I have.
In the systems that you've toured, in the jails that you've run, in your lots of years in law enforcement, could you imagine a scenario where people could get into a jail, murder somebody, and escape without anybody ever seeing that person? Can you imagine it?
No, I really can't imagine that. No.
What if you,
I really can't.
What if you add in to the fact that the 2 guards who were assigned to watch this prisoner falsified records, didn't check on the prisoner for 8 hours, and the cameras malfunctioned? Does that add anything to your opinion?
So I'm going to say this. A lot of that does not make sense. And, without casting judgment on anyone, I find it very hard to believe that the officers who worked there in that jail knew that they had Mr. Epstein under their watch and did some of the things that we heard in the media. Now, is it possible? Yeah, it is possible that, we get caught up with the business of, texting on our cell phone and
Or sleeping?
or sleeping.
Some of these guards fall asleep.
Or sleeping, yeah, and things happen. And so, again, without, trying to make a decision or determination about what happened, I think the officers hopefully will have a response to the allegations that were brought.
They were charged criminally. Did you know that?
I understand, yes.
That's
Very interesting.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, we'll see if they plead guilty. We'll see what happens to them. But, I have visited clients in jail. I've been taken a tour by you of your facility, and we had to go through multiple layers of security to get to the prisoners, to get to the cells, to take a tour. So, like, if somebody came in to do this, there would have to be a very extensive conspiracy.
If he was alone, yeah. I mean, unless you had someone with him, another inmate. But yeah.
You're okay. Hold on. You're saying that potentially another inmate
Correct.
killed him.
That's
Okay,
possible.
I didn't read between the lines on that one. It's somebody. I was always thinking somebody from the outside was coming in to kill him.
So
weren't they saying like Hillary Clinton
Here's
broke
what
in
happened.
there and killed him?
Well, this is a real story.
Yeah.
This is a real story that happened in Michigan prisons. Okay, this is not federal prison. But this is Michigan prisons. There was a guy, a snitch, an informant, and he was helping the FBI catch dirty prison guards. Prison guards were taking money to do favors for prisoners and things like that. And the guards realized it, found out that he was a snitch, figured it out, and they created a scenario where another inmate could go in and stab him with a shank. and they were charged. I mean, this happened.
The guards were charged.
The guards were, yeah. So you can create a situation where an inmate can kill another inmate. I'm not saying that's what happened with Epstein.
Right.
I'm just saying. But if the people are, if the administration's in on it, or even at the guard level, you can put two people together, and one will come out dead.
Yeah, and so what Kevin is saying, there is a possibility that, situation can occur where the officers just turn their back and don't see what's happening.
Just a willful turning of the back. They know something's going to happen. They're not looking. I mean, there's a lot of money involved in this case. I mean, this is a multi-billionaire. He had lots of enemies. He had lots of people who probably wanted him dead. So, money could have...
he thought that could happen because he was putting money in all the other prisoners' commissary accounts.
I saw that.
To try and make sure that none of them hurt him, to try and befriend them. So he thought it was a possibility.
It's crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot of unanswered questions, certainly with, again, all of the high-profile individuals in our country that he was associated with, and just kind of the clandestine theories that we have about what happens in jails. It's not hard to understand why so many people are challenging the information that we've been provided, correct? I mean, one of my favorite movies is Shawshank Redemption.
Whose is it?
Right.
That's the type of movie that you're flipping channels, it comes on, you can't turn it off.
Time.
No matter what scene it's on.
Right.
And I'm hoping when I turn it on, I'm like, oh my God, there's an hour and a half left.
Right.
All right.
Right.
Sorry, kids. I got to watch this for an hour and a half.
So you have
I
this
can't turn it off.
Warden, this corrupt warden that, he's using his position in the facility there to further his own personal gains. And so, we see movies like that, we hear stories like that, and we understand why so many people in America is challenging this. No, you knew who that guy was. You know who he was tied to. I don't believe that he hung himself, and I don't believe that those officers actually shopped on their phone all day and ignored that guy. Something else happened. And the unfortunate thing is we've been told that the cameras malfunction. So that's a tough one.
That is a tough one. There's a lot of weird things in that case.
I believe there is one camera and one piece of video that exists that judges have seen or that people have seen but has not been made aware to the public. I believe that's true.
Right. I mean, isn't there some confusion?
If that changes the story or not.
Kevin, isn't there some confusion about the suicide attempt 6 days earlier? Like there was allegations of assault, or was it a suicide? I mean, that's got to come out.
Or did he beat himself up? Because there were signs of an assault, but the question was, did he beat himself up to make it look like he was beat up, but was really trying to commit suicide, or what exactly happened there? And they were trying to get to the bottom of that, and they never did.
One question I had, in 2008, he was locked up in Palm Beach, somewhere in Florida.
Right. Yes.
Palm Beach, I think it was. And he had so much money that he spent $150,000, $160,000 on private prison guards or on extra time for the guards, and they left his prison door open. And he was able to come and go out of his cell. He was able to go home. He was on work release during the weeks, but even when he was locked up, it sounds like they left his cell door open. Have you ever heard of anything like that? Would that ever happen in Wayne County?
No.
Palm Beach is a little different than Wayne County.
It sounded crazy to me. I don't know if that happened.
But he had his own personal driver come get him and drive him to work release. He had a lot of perks.
So we do have work release in Wayne County, and certainly, people leave the jail in the morning, go to work, and they come back in the evening. But when they come back in the evening, they get strip searched, and they get placed in a cell with a locked door. It is our policy that all doors are locked at all times on cells. And in fact, it's part of our fire code here.
You mentioned at the beginning of the interview that the Wayne County population is going down. Do you believe that there are too many people in your jails that shouldn't be there, that aren't either, violent enough, or that can be on the street either with a tether or without a tether? I mean, do you think that they're locking up too many people?
I wouldn't say that they were locking up too many people, because certainly we don't subscribe to the hug a thug, philosophy in Wayne County. Jail is for people that are a danger to our community. There are times, though, when we see people who are really in jail because, someone might have gotten upset, or a judge might be tired of seeing this person come back and forth in front of them. I have one individual right now who was housed in our jail. He's been in our jail probably more times than he's in our top 5 of all time, and we're going back like 20 years.
Wait, frequent flyer miles
Frequent
type
flyer.
thing? Does he have a card where he gets a little card?
Frequent visitor. But get this story. And so he's someone that he was identified. He came in on a misdemeanor trespassing. He was flagged for his mental illness. We diverted him from jail to treatment. And the agreement was you go to treatment, you follow all of the prescribed treatment plan for you, and you don't go back to the area where you were trespassing. Well, a week later, guess what? He goes back to that location where he was trespassing. We get a call. They go out and lock him up. He comes back to jail, and the staff tell me, I said, well, why is he back in jail for trespassing? Well, we got called to the location. Well, what's going on at that location? You know what's going on at that location? His daughter lives at that location. His daughter's mother is married again, and the new husband is like, hey, he's not a bad guy, but when he's drinking, he causes problems. I don't want him here. And so the court is trying to balance that by saying, all right, I have to do something for this husband so the situation doesn't escalate. And a lot of times the courts didn't know what to do. He comes to jail, we put him in treatment. And it wasn't until our navigator, our social worker, looked and said, that's why he's going back there. Because the only person he has a relationship with is his daughter. On top of that, he's an ex-military vet who is in his first stages of dementia. Now, is that a person that should be in jail for 90 days? I don't think so. He needs treatment. And then once he gets out of treatment, he needs a peer to make sure that he understands the things that he needs to do to have that relationship with his daughter and not violate that court order.
And a lot of times, there's not a facility that can handle someone like that, and that's why they're relying on you and your staff to take care of these people, because there's no, when Governor Engler cut all the mental health budgets back in the, early 90s.
Correct.
It's as high as 40% now in jails, mental illness. That's where everybody ends up. The families can't take care of them anymore. They finally give up. They end up on the street. They end up committing a crime, and they go to jail. And the jails take care of them. And it's more expensive, I think, to take care of mentally ill in jail than it is in
You're absolutely correct, because they actually stay longer. A person arrested on a misdemeanor trespassing that doesn't have a mental illness would probably spend an average of about 15 days. That individual who has those mental health challenges spends an average of about 24 days.
Wow.
Yes.
That's expensive.
It is.
Plus the cost of the guards plus the cost of the guards is more than say a nurse at a hospital.
So it's $160 a day per prisoner?
About $160, $165 per day per prisoner in Wayne County.
And that's whether it's mental illness or straight? Whatever.
That's straight. Okay. Per prisoner.
Per prisoner. So this is off topic of what we were talking about, but I'm reading the news, and this Officer Kidd situation is really upsetting.
It is. And
I just want to know your opinion about what's going on. You said that they caught the man who's coming to your jail. I didn't get his name. I guess the name isn't all that important. Did either one of you see the name?
It's not important.
But we're talking about Officer McLean and Officer Kidd. McLean is the one who unfortunately passed in a shooting this week, I think it was. And Officer Kidd was the sergeant who was the supervisor who was sitting a block away in a patrol car, got the call to come, didn't come. He was fired. He was called a coward 5 years ago when he was fired. He's called a coward now. The chief is talking about it, but you've been around. What is your opinion on what he should have done, what happened, how the chief is handling all this?
So I'm like our Wayne County prosecutor Kim Worthy on this. A lot of times, she gets unjust criticism about the time that she takes to issue a warrant, and we often hear our prosecutors say, we want to go step by step, be very methodical and almost surgical in terms of looking at every case to make sure that we don't get it wrong. I remember something that Kim Worthy said probably before she ever became the prosecutor, maybe when she was running. She says, it's better to let 10 guilty men go than to convict one innocent man because of the injustice that is done to that person who is innocent and goes to jail. And I start out with that to say that, you know, what we heard is very disturbing on the part of Sergeant Kidd. And if true, certainly there's no place for it in law enforcement. But the other side of it for me is, you know, I don't know all the facts. I don't know what was in Sergeant Kidd's head or mind if he didn't go. I don't know how Sergeant Kidd processed the information. And I would just hope and pray that, as I'm sure Chief Craig and his staff will do, that they move like the prosecutor on this one. You know, take their time and make sure that they look at all of the facts, because, you know, it's very terrible that we lost Officer Rasheed McClain. And although this is not a death sentence, it could equate to something like that for an officer to be accused of cowardness. And because of your cowardness, another officer died. You know, so my opinion is everyone needs to just really take their time, look at all the facts, and if what we heard turns out to be the result, then certainly there is no place for it in law enforcement.
So you were on the streets as a Detroit police officer when Malice Green was killed, right?
Yes.
And Malice Green he died on the streets of Detroit at the hands of two police officers, Budson and Nevers, Walter Budson and Larry Nevers. And at that time, when Nevers and Budson were charged and ultimately convicted, there was a feeling that police officers were not going to get out of their cars. Do you remember this?
I do.
This was because if Budson and Nevers had just driven by Malice Green and gone home, Malice Green would not have died. They would not have gone to jail. They thought Malice Green had a rock of cocaine in his hand, and it became, I don't know if it was real or not, but it became the talk of the town that we're just not going to stop and bother these people. Not bother them, but we're not going to do our job.
Risk our career.
We're not going to get out of our car, risk our lives, risk our career to do this. And there's some belief that crime got out of control because police officers either looked the other way or just didn't get out. It's not exactly the same as cowardness, but do you remember that time period? And do you think that actually happened, or is that just something people suggested?
So I remember it very, very vividly. In fact, I worked the 4th precinct, they worked the 3rd precinct, and oftentimes we would partner up and do enforcement initiatives together. And when those guys were indicted, it was probably one of the most contentious times in the police department, because you have to understand this too. A lot of Detroit police officers are born and raised, or at that time was born and raised in the city of Detroit. And so there was even a lot of opinions on the law enforcement side about how they should have handled that situation. And I can tell you, as an individual who has been in several fights in my career, have been in a couple of shootouts, I could never imagine a situation where I'm tussling with someone who supposedly have crack cocaine in his hand, and I am taking a metal flashlight and cracking their skull to get them to open their hand. I just can't imagine it. And I tell you, right around that time, myself and my partner encountered an individual like that who not only had cocaine, but had a gun in his bag. It's 1:30 in the morning. We're struggling with this guy, and he must have been amped up on dope. I'm a pretty big guy. And this guy was tossing me, and all I could do was get him to the ground. And when I got him to the ground, my gun came out of my holster. He falls on top of it, and now he has my gun in his hand. Now, I think we would have been justified in cracking his skull with our flashlights, but we never once hit him across his head with a flashlight. And we were backed up by some of the same officers that worked on the shift with Budson and Evans, because we work what we call the power shift. And so I'm beating this guy, I'm kneeing him, I'm kicking him in the side, And it was just something about me that I never thought to hit him across his head. So I don't see any justification for that. You know, I would have been justified in shooting that guy because he had my gun. Okay. Well, that's why I couldn't shoot him, because he had my gun.
Right. What are you going to shoot him with?
But
where was your partner? Your partner could have shot him.
My partner,
But he was on
shot
top.
him.
You were right there. You could have got
And my
shot
partner, and so my partner had his gun out, no doubt, because we were able to keep this guy on top of the gun, and I'm holding the barrel. And so we didn't have to shoot him, but we were beating him, trying to get him to turn it loose. And it wasn't until the backup got there that we were able to secure my weapon and place him under arrest. So I share that because that happened right around the same time as Malice Green's death. So I was of the opinion that it was handled completely the wrong way. There is no justification in beating an individual across the head with a metal pipe who has something that cannot cause you death. And that's the bottom line.
Do you think it changed the way police officers looked at their job, or not really?
I think I really don't. Those police officers that were truly dedicated to doing the jobs for the right reason, I don't believe you can find a police officer today that would challenge what I just said to you. You know, a person right now today in America, we're decriminalizing the opioid issue. Across America, they're saying instead of arresting people, give them Narcan and take them to treatment. But Malice Green had crack cocaine in his hand, and he got his skull cracked open. Okay, I don't think there's a police officer in America today that would say, oh yeah, I understand that. You know, unfortunately, there was some racial tension behind it, because Malice Green was an African-American male, and Butson and Nevers were two white officers, okay? Butson, I'm just going to put on the record, I had a very good relationship with and much respect for, and I was very shocked that he found himself in that situation. I really was, you know? And, you know, you heard the stories, and it's like, well, you know, maybe he didn't do all of the beating, but nevertheless, what happened that night was unjustifiable. And so for some, again, it might have changed. There was some, again, tension based upon the race issue, no doubt, because certainly I believe the mayor had made a statement at that time, you know, that pissed a lot of people off. And let's get it, you know, Kim Worthy, who now is,
she was the judge
very well
in that case.
She prosecuted them.
Oh.
Never.
Oh, that's right.
Her and Doug
She
Baker.
wasn't the judge, that's right. Yeah.
She was the prosecutor, and she did an awesome job. And as a result, I think people across Wayne County, I don't care, Republican or Democrat, you know, love and respect Kim Worthy. And so, yeah, there was some times that, you know, there was a lot of tension at roll call, but we got beyond it. And I say we got beyond it because even though that happened with Malice Green, we didn't have a Ferguson situation.
Right.
And why didn't we have a Ferguson situation? Because as I said, you know, a lot of the citizens realized that a lot of those officers are, if not their brothers and sisters, but brothers and sisters of people that they went to school with, they grew up with, and that is not the entire department, never was and never will be.
Yeah, it's got to drive you crazy. You know, you have these, like, you'll have mass shootings and things, and all these officers are running in to stop the gunman. Yes. And then a lot of media focus will be on the one guy who waited 10 seconds to go. Or you'll see...
Right, the Parkland shooting, and the one officer, I don't know if it was Parkland, but the officer who didn't go in.
Right, but every time, 98% of police officers get in it for the right reasons, do the right things. All that gets in the media are those 2%, and that's because it's news. But there's very little perspective that goes around that. But does it drive you crazy when you see all these protests? I mean, people are coming out shooting at police officers. There was a really bad feeling. It subsided, but it was less than a year ago that this was happening all the time, everywhere.
That's correct. You know, and I like what you said, Kevin. It's, you know, unfortunate here in America, you know, it's just that 1 or 2% that makes the news. But there are things that police officers do that are great every day, okay, that often don't make the news. And one of the things that bothers me is we don't hear about police officers being heroes until, unfortunately, they lose their lives in the line of duty. They're heroes every day because there's not very many people that, you know, will put on that gun and badge and say, I'll go out here and I'll sacrifice my life and safety to make sure that my city is safe. One of the things that we see across American NFL, you know, at Southfield on Sundays, they have this, I think, third quarter where they bring in a former military veteran, you know, as a hero. Okay, that's a person living. And I submit to you that every one of those Detroit police officers and Wayne County Sheriff's deputies and every other law enforcement officer across this country are heroes every day. It's just that 1 or 2% that unfortunately sells newspapers and get the attention of the media.
I couldn't agree more. And on that note, I want to thank you for your service and all your years in law enforcement and at the Sheriff's Department. You know, thanks to you, we live in a great city, and I feel safe when I go down, and I appreciate everything you and your fellow officers and sheriffs are doing. And I have lots more questions for you, but we're out of time today, and I hope you'll come back.
For sure.
Because I've learned a ton,
For sure.
and I love talking to you off the record. I love the fact that you came on.
Did we get a verdict if you think it was suicide or murder?
You didn't get that verdict from me.
He doesn't know.
You know,
Nobody knows.
But I do appreciate, you know, having a conversation with you all. And I do want to close it out with this by saying that, you know, thank you to you, Mike, and to you, Kevin, because certainly, you know, law enforcement is only as good as the community that it serves. And the things that you have done, Kevin, with us over the years, you know, giving balanced reports, balanced media, that's something that, you know, we are so grateful of in law enforcement. You probably don't hear it enough, but we thank you and we appreciate you for that. And then, Mike, your service to the community, I mean, you're all over the TV. People know what you do for, you know, these people who are less fortunate, the things that you do for the Detroit public school systems, and the many other things that you do that often don't make the news. That's what makes it work, and that's what helps us do our job the way that we do. And so on behalf of my boss, Sheriff Benny Napoleon, and all the men and women of the Wayne County Sheriff's Office, I thank both of you from the bottom of our hearts.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. What a fabulous man you are. All right, Kevin.
Good stuff.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for watching Open Mic. I hope you've been enjoying the episodes. Please subscribe over here. Watch all the episodes, like the episodes, share the episodes, and subscribe. Subscribing helps me, and it helps get the word out. So do it. Enjoy the episode, share with your friends and family, and keep enjoying.